Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Managing Medieval Women. The harsh reality. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Managing Medieval Women. The harsh reality. Imagine waking before sunrise every single day. Not because you chose to, but because your entire life belonged to someone else before your feet even touched the cold floor. The expectations of your family, your village, your church, and your husband were already waiting. In the medieval world, a woman's freedom was rarely measured by what she wanted. Instead, it was measured by what others allowed her to do. When people today imagine medieval women, they often picture elegant queens in magnificent castles, noble ladies dressed in expensive gowns, or beautiful princesses waiting for heroic knights. Paintings, fairy tales, and modern films have created an image filled with romance, luxury, and endless courtly love. But for the overwhelming majority of women who lived between the 5th and 15th centuries, daily life looked nothing like those stories. Most medieval women never entered a castle except perhaps to deliver goods, clean rooms, or serve the wealthy. They never owned sparkling jewelry or wore silk dresses. They did not spend afternoons strolling through gardens while musicians played. Their lives were filled with endless work, constant responsibility, physical exhaustion, and a future that was largely decided before they were old enough to understand it. The medieval world was built upon hierarchy. Kings ruled kingdoms. Lords ruled estates. Priests guided souls. Fathers ruled households. Husbands ruled families. Nearly every institution expected women to obey male authority. Whether a woman was born into poverty or privilege, her life was shaped by expectations she rarely had the power to challenge. This does not mean medieval women had no influence. Many demonstrated extraordinary intelligence, resilience, and determination. Some managed businesses, defended castles, governed lands, and shaped history. But these women were exceptional, precisely because the ordinary rules made such achievements difficult. To understand the reality of medieval women, it is important to leave behind modern assumptions. Rights that many people consider basic today simply did not exist in the same way. Education was limited, legal independence was uncommon. Marriage often served economic or political goals rather than personal choice. Survival itself demanded constant labor. A girl's life usually began with uncertainty. Infant mortality remained frighteningly high throughout much of medieval Europe. Disease spread easily. Medical knowledge was limited. Families often lost children before they reached adulthood. Every birth carried risks, not only for the baby, but also for the mother. If a girl survived childhood, her future was often planned long before she became an adult. Parents considered family reputation, property, alliances, and economic security. Love rarely stood at the center of these decisions. Marriage was often viewed as a practical arrangement that benefited families rather than individuals. The experiences of women varied enormously depending upon wealth, geography, religion, and historical period. A merchant's daughter living in a prosperous town faced different opportunities than a peasant girl working on a remote farm. A noblewoman in England lived differently from a village woman in Italy or Germany. Medieval Europe itself was never one uniform society. Still, certain expectations appeared repeatedly across regions. Women were expected to be modest, hardworking, faithful, obedient, and devoted to family life. These ideals appeared in religious teachings, legal traditions, literature, and everyday customs. From an early age, girls learned domestic skills: cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, weaving cloth, caring for younger siblings, collecting water, tending animals, preserving food, and assisting with farming became part of daily routine. There was rarely a clear separation between childhood and adulthood. Responsibilities arrived early. Education depended almost entirely on social class. Noble girls sometimes learned reading, writing, music, household management, and religious instruction. Some convents offered education to girls entering religious life, but most peasant women learned practical skills rather than formal literacy. Knowledge passed from mothers, grandmothers, neighbors, and experience instead of books. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of life. The church influenced ideas about morality, marriage, family, sexuality, and gender. Many sermons praised female virtues such as humility, obedience, patience, and modesty. Biblical figures served as examples of ideal behavior, while stories of sinful women warned against pride, temptation, or disobedience. At the same time, medieval Christianity also honored women through female saints, abbesses, and the veneration of the Virgin Mary. These examples created a complex picture. Women could be respected as models of holiness while simultaneously facing legal and social limitations. Work never truly ended. Rural women labored in fields alongside men during planting and harvest seasons. They milked cows, gathered eggs, baked bread, brewed ale, cared for gardens, collected firewood, and maintained households. During harsh winters, they repaired clothing, spun thread, and prepared food stores that would determine whether families survived until spring. Many people imagine medieval men doing all agricultural labor while women remained inside cottages. Historical evidence tells a different story. Farm survival depended upon every available pair of hands. Women frequently planted crops, harvested grain, cared for livestock, and transported supplies. Physical labor formed an ordinary part of life. Urban women contributed as well. In growing medieval towns, women worked as servants, market sellers, textile workers, brewers, shop assistants, laundresses, and sometimes independent artisans. Widows occasionally inherited businesses after their husbands died, allowing them greater economic responsibility than married women often possessed. Marriage transformed nearly every aspect of a woman's legal and social identity. Once married, her responsibilities expanded dramatically. She managed food supplies, organized household work, supervised servants if the family could afford them, cared for children, and supported her husband's occupation. Success or failure affected the survival of the entire household. Motherhood carried enormous expectations. Families often desired many children because infant mortality remained high, and additional workers strengthened agricultural households. Yet every pregnancy brought significant danger. Without modern medicine, complications frequently became fatal. Countless women died giving birth. Despite these hardships, medieval women created friendships, celebrated festivals, laughed together, shared stories, exchanged practical advice, and built communities that helped families survive. Human life remained filled with emotion despite difficult circumstances. Legal systems generally favored male authority, but local customs varied widely. Some women inherited property under specific conditions. Others managed estates during husbands' absences. Noblewomen sometimes acted as regents, while husbands fought in wars or traveled abroad. Practical necessity occasionally gave women responsibilities beyond traditional expectations. Even clothing reflected social expectations. Garments identified status, wealth, occupation, and morality. Laws in some regions restricted what ordinary people could wear. Noble women displayed expensive fabrics, while peasant women relied upon practical wool and linen designed for hard labor rather than fashion. Beauty standards also differed from modern ideals. Pale skin often suggested higher status because it implied freedom from outdoor labor. Hair, modest dress, and proper behavior became symbols of respectability. Appearance communicated social position as much as personal preference. Violence formed another difficult reality. Wars devastated villages, raids destroyed homes, famines forced desperate choices, disease ignored social class. Women often carried the burden of keeping families together amid instability, even when they possessed little political power. Yet medieval women should never be viewed simply as passive victims. Historical records reveal individuals who negotiated marriages, managed finances, settled disputes, preserved family traditions, influenced local politics, produced remarkable literature, and demonstrated extraordinary resilience under difficult circumstances. Understanding their lives requires balance. Medieval society imposed genuine restrictions upon women, but women also found ways to exercise influence within those limits. Their stories are not merely tales of suffering, but also examples of endurance, adaptation, intelligence, and survival. The harsh reality was not simply that medieval women obeyed men. It was that nearly every part of society expected that obedience as natural. Family traditions reinforced it. Religious teachings often supported it. Legal systems reflected it. Economic necessity depended upon it. Challenging those expectations could carry serious social consequences. As we continue exploring this world, we will move beyond popular myths and examine what daily life actually looked like, from childhood to marriage, from motherhood to old age, from noble courts to muddy village roads. The reality was often harder, more complicated, and far more human than the legends suggest. Childhood, family authority, and growing up As a medieval girl's life did not begin with dreams of independence. From the moment she entered the world, her future was already shaped by the expectations of her family, her community, and the society into which she had been born. Her name, her education, her work, her marriage, and even many of the choices she would make as an adult were often influenced long before she was old enough to understand them. For many families, the birth of any healthy child was a blessing because infant mortality remained painfully high throughout the Middle Ages. Parents knew that survival was never guaranteed. Disease, malnutrition, poor sanitation, and limited medical knowledge meant that many children never reached adulthood. Every birthday represented another victory against a world filled with danger. Although sons were often valued for their ability to inherit land, continue family names, and perform military service, daughters were also essential members of medieval households. They contributed labor from an early age and eventually strengthened family alliances through marriage. In farming communities, every child capable of working increased a family's chances of survival. The first years of a girl's life were usually spent close to her mother or another female caregiver. Mothers breastfed infants whenever possible, although wealthy families sometimes hired wet nurses. Child care was practical rather than sentimental by modern standards. Parents loved their children deeply, but harsh realities meant that survival often came before emotional comfort. As girls learned to walk, they also began learning responsibility. Childhood was generally much shorter than it is today. There was little expectation that children would spend years playing without obligation. Instead, each stage of development brought new duties. At first, these responsibilities were simple. A young girl might collect kindling, carry water in small containers, feed chickens, gather eggs, or watch younger siblings for short periods. These tasks appeared insignificant individually, but together they prepared her for adult life. Play certainly existed. Children made dolls from scraps of cloth, carved wooden toys, played games with stones, and invented entertainment using whatever materials surrounded them. However, leisure rarely occupied the center of daily life. Most games also taught practical skills, cooperation, or physical coordination that proved useful later. Education varied dramatically depending upon wealth and location. Most peasant girls never attended anything resembling a formal school. Their education came from observation. They watched their mothers bake bread, prepare vegetables, preserve food, spin wool, weave cloth, patch clothing, and manage households with remarkable efficiency. Every activity became a lesson. Mistakes were corrected immediately because mistakes could waste precious food or valuable materials. Flour, cloth, firewood, and livestock represented survival. Learning happened through repetition rather than textbooks. Girls quickly discovered that nearly every household task demanded experience. Baking bread required understanding ovens, whose temperatures could not be measured precisely. Brewing ale demanded careful timing. Spinning thread required patience and coordination developed over many years. Even cleaning involved hard physical work. Floors needed sweeping. Ashes required removal. Water had to be carried from wells or rivers. Laundry demanded hours of scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, and drying without modern soap or machinery. For noble girls, childhood looked somewhat different, but remained heavily structured. A daughter born into an aristocratic family enjoyed better clothing, improved nutrition, and greater physical security than most peasants. Yet privilege came with its own expectations. Rather than preparing for agricultural labor, noble daughters prepared to manage great households. They learned manners suitable for court life, religious instruction, embroidery, music, reading when education was available, and the complicated etiquette expected among powerful families. Household management became one of their most important subjects. Running a castle or a large manor required overseeing servants, organizing food storage, supervising kitchens, accounting for supplies, managing guests, and ensuring that hundreds of people performed their duties efficiently. This responsibility demanded intelligence rather than luxury. Many noblewomen later became highly capable administrators precisely because they had practiced these skills from childhood. Religion surrounded every stage of growing up. Children attended church regularly and memorized prayers from an early age. Priests taught moral lessons emphasizing obedience, humility, honesty, charity, and devotion. Girls frequently heard stories about female saints whose patience, faith, sacrifice, and modesty served as ideals to imitate. At the same time, they also encountered warnings. Religious teachings often emphasized the dangers of pride, vanity, gossip, temptation, and disobedience. Young girls learned that personal reputation mattered enormously. A family's honor could depend upon a daughter's behavior. Simple actions that might seem ordinary today, speaking too boldly, dressing immodestly, or spending time alone with young men, could generate damaging rumors. In tightly connected villages, reputation spread quickly. Neighbors observed one another constantly. Marriage prospects often depended as much upon perceived character as family wealth. Because of this, parents carefully supervised daughters throughout adolescence. Many girls rarely traveled alone. Their daily routines remained closely connected to family responsibilities. Fathers usually held legal authority over unmarried daughters. Major decisions concerning education, apprenticeships, religious life, and marriage generally rested with parents rather than the girls themselves. This authority reflected the broader medieval understanding of family. The household functioned almost like a small economic unit. Every member possessed duties contributing to collective survival. Individual preference usually ranked below family necessity. As girls entered their early teenage years, responsibilities increased significantly. They no longer performed only simple chores. Now they prepared full meals, baked bread independently, cared for livestock, produced textiles, supervised younger children, and sometimes managed households temporarily when parents traveled. Many also worked beside fathers during harvest seasons. Contrary to popular imagination, agricultural work was rarely divided into completely separate male and female responsibilities. Entire families entered fields together during the busiest times of year. Harvest delays could threaten food supplies for the entire winter. Every available worker mattered. Girls learned remarkable endurance. Hours of bending over crops, carrying heavy baskets, lifting water buckets, tending fires, and caring for animals built physical strength often overlooked by modern portrayals of medieval women. Medical knowledge remained limited, meaning families relied heavily upon experienced women for practical health care. Young girls watched mothers and grandmothers prepare herbal remedies, clean wounds, assist sick relatives, and care for pregnant women. This informal education preserved generations of practical knowledge. Not every girl followed the same path. Some entered convents. For families unable to provide dowries or seeking religious careers for daughters, convent life offered another future. Many convents educated girls in reading, writing, music, Latin prayers, manuscript copying, and administration. Certain abbesses eventually became influential leaders overseeing large religious communities. For a small number of women, convents provided opportunities unavailable elsewhere. Still, most medieval girls remained within ordinary family life. As adolescence approached, conversations increasingly turned toward marriage. Parents evaluated neighboring families. Economic conditions influenced negotiations. Dowries became important considerations. Friendships between young men and women were carefully monitored because families wished to protect reputations before marriage arrangements were completed. Romantic love certainly existed. Poetry, songs, and personal letters demonstrate that young people experienced attraction, affection, jealousy, and heartbreak, much like people today. But emotional relationships often developed within boundaries established by family expectations. For many girls, adulthood arrived gradually rather than suddenly. There was no single ceremony marking complete independence. Instead, increasing responsibility transformed childhood into adult life almost without notice. One season she helped bake bread. The next she baked it herself. One year she watched younger siblings. Soon she became responsible for raising children of her own. Looking back through history, it is easy to assume medieval girls accepted these expectations without question. Human nature suggests otherwise. Some undoubtedly dreamed of different futures. Some resisted arranged marriages. Some challenged authority. Some sought education beyond what society expected. Others embraced their responsibilities with pride, believing they strengthened their families and communities. The historical record preserves only fragments of these individual voices, but those fragments reveal personalities every bit as complex as our own. Their world imposed limitations, yet within those limits they laughed, argued, learned, hoped, feared, and imagined better futures. Childhood prepared medieval girls not for freedom, but for responsibility. Every lesson, every chore, every warning, and every expectation aimed toward one goal, preparing them to become wives, mothers, workers, and respected members of society. Whether born inside a grand castle or a humble cottage, nearly every medieval girl grew up knowing that her future would be measured less by personal ambition than by how well she fulfilled the duties others expected of her: courtship, marriage, dowries, and the loss of independence. For most medieval women, childhood ended long before they felt like adults. There was no dramatic moment when life suddenly changed. Instead, one conversation, one agreement between families, or one signature on a marriage contract could quietly determine the rest of a young woman's future. Marriage was not simply about two people falling in love. It was one of the most important social, economic, and legal institutions in medieval society. Families viewed it as a way to secure alliances, protect property, strengthen businesses, increase wealth, or ensure survival. Love could certainly grow within a marriage, but it was often considered a welcome bonus rather than the primary purpose. As daughters approached their teenage years, parents became increasingly concerned about their reputations. A respectable reputation was valuable. It influenced marriage opportunities, family honor, and social standing. Even small rumors could damage a young woman's future. In tightly connected villages, almost everyone knew one another. Neighbors watched daily routines, attended the same church, worked in nearby fields, and shared local gossip. Privacy, as people understand it today, hardly existed. A young woman was expected to behave modestly in public. Loud arguments, excessive drinking, public affection, or behavior considered flirtatious could quickly become the subject of conversation throughout an entire community. Parents often supervised interactions between unmarried daughters and young men. This supervision was not always based on distrust. Instead, it reflected genuine concern that any scandal, even an unfounded one, could reduce the family's social standing. Courtship varied across Europe. Among peasants, young men and women often met while working together during harvests, village festivals, religious celebrations, or local markets. These gatherings provided rare opportunities for conversation outside immediate family circles. Songs, dancing, storytelling, and seasonal celebrations sometimes allowed young people to express interest in one another. Yet even these occasions were watched carefully by older relatives and neighbors. Among nobles, courtship followed stricter expectations. Marriage negotiations frequently began between families rather than the future husband and wife. Political alliances mattered enormously. A marriage might unite neighboring lands, end disputes, strengthen military cooperation, or improve financial security. In such cases, the opinions of the young couple often carried less importance than the interests of their families. Some noble brides first met their future husbands only shortly before their wedding. Others had known them since childhood through family connections. Either way, personal choice remained limited compared to modern expectations. Age differences were common. Many women married in their late teens, although practices varied by region and century. Men often married slightly later because they needed sufficient resources to support a household. Among the nobility, political considerations sometimes resulted in even earlier formal marriage agreements, although the marriage itself might not be fully recognized until both parties reached appropriate ages. Dowries played an essential role. A dowry consisted of property, money, livestock, clothing, household goods, or land provided by the bride's family. This wealth accompanied the bride into marriage. Dowries helped establish new households and demonstrated the economic standing of her family. Preparing a suitable dowry could require years of careful saving. Mothers and daughters often spent countless hours weaving cloth, embroidering linens, preparing furniture, and collecting household items that would eventually become part of the dowry. For poorer families, assembling these resources represented a tremendous challenge. Some delayed marriages until enough property had been gathered. Others accepted less favorable marriage arrangements because they could not provide larger dowries. In wealthy families, dowries could include enormous estates, castles, valuable jewelry, and political privileges. Entire territories occasionally changed hands through marriage. Marriage contracts carefully recorded these arrangements. Although women often brought considerable wealth into marriage, legal control over that wealth frequently shifted toward their husbands after the wedding. This reflected the legal traditions of many medieval societies. Marriage itself transformed a woman's legal identity. Before marriage, she generally lived under her father's authority. After marriage, responsibility transferred to her husband. This transition affected many aspects of daily life. The husband usually represented the household in legal matters. He made many important financial decisions. He exercised authority recognized by both custom and law. However, this did not necessarily mean wives remained silent or uninvolved. Many husbands relied heavily upon their wives' judgment. Running a household required constant cooperation. Successful marriages depended upon practical partnership even within unequal legal structures. A medieval household functioned almost like a business. Food production, livestock management, textile manufacturing, child care, financial planning, and seasonal labor all demanded careful organization. An experienced wife became indispensable. She supervised servants if the family employed them. She monitored food supplies. She organized clothing production. She managed household inventories. She cared for children. She often handled small-scale trading at local markets. Without effective household management, even wealthy families could face serious difficulties. Despite these responsibilities, medieval law generally granted husbands considerable authority. Most legal traditions accepted that husbands could discipline wives under certain circumstances, although excessive violence was sometimes condemned by religious authorities or local courts. In practice, enforcement varied widely. Some marriages were affectionate partnerships built upon mutual respect. Others became deeply unhappy. The medieval world contained every variety of human relationship. Love certainly existed. Personal letters, poems, songs, and surviving diaries revealed genuine affection between many husbands and wives. Couples mourned one another deeply after death. Parents grieved lost children with heartbreaking sincerity. These emotional records remind us that medieval people loved their families just as intensely as people today. At the same time, marriage remained closely connected to duty. A wife was expected to support her husband's reputation. She managed the home while he performed responsibilities outside it. If he traveled for trade, military service, or political obligations, she often assumed temporary control of household operations. This responsibility required intelligence, discipline, and confidence. Many medieval women became remarkably capable administrators simply through daily necessity. Religion reinforced marital expectations. Church teachings described marriage as a sacred bond. Faithfulness became a religious obligation. Divorce, as understood today, was generally unavailable. Although certain marriages could sometimes be annulled under specific circumstances, ending a marriage remained extremely difficult. Couples were expected to remain together regardless of hardship. The church encouraged husbands to treat wives with care and wives to respect their husbands. Reality, however, did not always match religious ideals. Economic hardship, illness, famine, war, and personal conflict placed enormous strain upon many households. Some marriages succeeded because both partners adapted together. Others survived only because society offered few alternatives. Widowhood eventually changed everything. If a husband died, a widow often gained greater legal independence than she had possessed during marriage. Many inherited responsibility for businesses, workshops, farms, or family property. Some successfully managed estates for decades. Ironically, widowhood sometimes provided women with freedoms unavailable during either childhood or marriage. Still, becoming a widow often meant financial uncertainty. Without adult sons or supportive relatives, many widows struggled to survive. Some remarried quickly. Others entered religious communities. Some lived with extended family. Life after a husband's death depended greatly upon wealth, location, and local customs. Looking back, it would be inaccurate to describe every medieval marriage as oppressive or every husband as cruel. Historical evidence paints a far more complicated picture. Many couples respected one another. Many shared responsibilities. Many raised loving families under extraordinarily difficult conditions. Yet it is equally important to recognize the structural imbalance built into medieval society. A woman's opportunities were often determined by decisions made by fathers, husbands, and male authorities. Her legal independence remained limited. Her economic security frequently depended upon male relatives. Her social reputation required constant protection. Marriage could bring stability, companionship, and shared purpose. It could also bring increased responsibility, reduced personal freedom, and lifelong obligations that could not easily be escaped. For countless medieval women, marriage represented both the beginning of adulthood and the moment when personal independence became even more restricted. Their lives became centered on maintaining households, raising children, protecting family honor, and ensuring survival in a world where every season brought new uncertainty. The wedding celebration itself might last only a day. Its consequences shaped every remaining year of a woman's life. Noble ladies, peasant wives, and the vast divide between their lives. When people imagine women in the Middle Ages, they often picture elegant ladies walking through magnificent castles, dressed in flowing gowns of velvet and silk, wearing jeweled crowns while servants attended to every need. It is an image that has appeared in countless films, novels, and fairy tales. Yet for the overwhelming majority of medieval women, that life was as distant as a dream, most women were not noble. They were peasants, craftsmen's wives, laborers, servants, or townswomen. Their homes were modest, their work was relentless, and their daily lives revolved around survival rather than luxury. The contrast between noble women and peasant women was enormous, but one important truth united them both. Regardless of wealth, medieval society expected women to fulfill their duties to family, religion, and community. The responsibilities looked different, but the expectations remained remarkably similar. A noblewoman woke inside a castle or manor house. Thick stone walls surrounded her, offering protection from raids and attacks. Servants handled many of the hardest physical tasks, but this did not mean her days were idle. Managing a noble household was an enormous responsibility. A large castle might contain dozens or even hundreds of people. Family members, servants, cooks, guards, stable workers, craftsmen, priests, guests, and laborers all depended upon careful organization. Food supplies had to last through winter. Storerooms required constant inspection. Kitchen staff needed supervision. Clothing had to be produced, repaired, and distributed. Guests required accommodation. Accounts had to be recorded. Medical supplies needed replenishing. Every mistake carried financial consequences. An efficient noblewoman became the heart of the household. If her husband left to fight in war or attend the king's court, she frequently assumed responsibility for the entire estate. Historical records describe noblewomen negotiating with neighboring lords, collecting rents, settling disputes among tenants, organizing defenses during sieges, and overseeing construction projects. These responsibilities demanded intelligence, confidence, and practical leadership. Some noblewomen became exceptionally skilled administrators. Their authority, however, usually existed because they represented their husbands rather than ruling entirely in their own right. Meanwhile, only a few miles away, a peasant woman experienced a completely different morning. She rose before sunrise. The fire needed lighting. Bread had to be prepared. Animals required feeding. Water had to be carried from a nearby well or stream. Children needed attention. The day's work often began before daylight and continued long after sunset. Unlike noblewomen, peasant wives performed much of the physical labor themselves. There were no servants to rely upon. Every meal required preparation from basic ingredients. Every garment demanded hours of spinning, weaving, sewing, and repair. Even obtaining clean water required repeated journeys carrying heavy buckets. The rhythm of peasant life followed the agricultural calendar. Spring meant planting. Summer demanded endless work in the fields. Autumn became harvest season. Winter shifted attention toward repairing tools, producing clothing, preserving food, and caring for livestock. Every season introduced new responsibilities. During harvest, women worked alongside men for long hours, cutting grain, gathering crops, stacking hay, and transporting produce. The image of medieval women remaining indoors while men farmed simply does not match historical reality. Entire families worked together because survival depended upon collective effort. – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – –– A poor harvest could bring hunger throughout an entire village. Women played central roles in preventing disaster. They preserved vegetables through drying and pickling. They brewed ale because clean drinking water was not always available. They made cheese from milk. They stored grains carefully to prevent spoilage. They monitored livestock that represented a family's wealth. One mistake could mean starvation months later. Housing reflected these differences dramatically. A noblewoman lived within spacious halls furnished with expensive tapestries, carved furniture, decorated chapels, and secure storage rooms. Heating remained imperfect, but the castle offered relative protection. A peasant family usually occupied a small wooden or stone cottage. One or two rooms served nearly every purpose. Cooking, eating, sleeping, and working all occurred within the same limited space. Smoke from indoor fires often filled the room because chimneys remained uncommon in many regions. Floors consisted of packed earth. Furniture remained simple. Animals sometimes shared portions of the building during harsh weather. Despite these differences, neither life could truly be described as comfortable by modern standards. Castles were cold. Stone walls trapped moisture. Disease spread easily. Medical care remained limited regardless of wealth. Even queens feared childbirth. Even noble families lost children to illness. Disease ignored social rank. Education also highlighted social divisions. Many noble daughters learned reading, writing, music, embroidery, languages, and household administration. Books remained expensive, making literacy a privilege enjoyed by relatively few. Peasant women usually learned through observation rather than formal instruction. Their expertise centered upon practical knowledge. They understood farming, food preservation, herbal remedies, animal care, spinning, weaving, brewing, and dozens of household skills essential for survival. Although many could not read, they possessed extraordinary practical intelligence developed through experience. Religion touched every level of society equally. Both noble women and peasant women attended church. Both observed religious festivals. Both confessed sins. Both prayed for healthy children, successful harvests, protection from disease, and peaceful deaths. The church reminded every woman that humility, obedience, charity, and faith represented important virtues. Yet wealth affected religious life as well. Noble families donated money to monasteries, commissioned chapels, sponsored priests, and sometimes placed daughters in convents where they received education unavailable elsewhere. Peasant women practiced faith through local churches, village traditions, and community celebrations. Clothing revealed social status immediately. A noblewoman wore garments made from fine wool, silk, linen, fur, and occasionally imported fabrics. Bright colors required expensive dyes. Jewelry demonstrated wealth. Fashion changed gradually among the upper classes. A peasant woman's clothing emphasized durability rather than appearance. Wool and court linen dominated. Aprons protected garments during work. Simple shoes wore out quickly from constant labor. Most clothing required repeated patching before replacement became possible. Beauty itself carried different meanings. For noblewomen, pale skin suggested high status because it indicated freedom from outdoor labor. For peasant women, sun-darkened skin reflected endless hours working beneath open skies. Neither appearance represented personal choice. Both reflected the demands of their daily lives. Marriage affected both groups differently as well. Noble marriages often served political purposes. Peasant marriages focused more heavily upon economic cooperation. Either way, women entered households where their work proved essential. A castle could not function without competent management. A farm could not survive without relentless labor. Women stood at the center of both. Occasionally, history produced extraordinary noblewomen whose names became famous. They ruled kingdoms as regents. They defended castles during wars. They influenced kings and shaped diplomacy. But such women represented rare exceptions rather than ordinary experience. Far more common were thousands upon thousands of anonymous women whose names never entered history. The peasant mother who harvested grain while carrying an infant. The village brewer whose ale supported her family. The widow who managed a small farm after losing her husband. The merchant's wife who balanced household accounts while raising children. These women rarely appeared in chronicles written by monks or royal historians. Yet without them, medieval society itself could not have functioned. The noblewoman and peasant wife lived worlds apart in wealth, comfort, education, and opportunity. One supervised servants. The other performed nearly every task herself. One managed estates, the other struggled to produce enough food for another winter. One worried about political alliances, the other worried about whether the family cow would survive until spring. Yet beneath these differences lay a shared reality. Both lived in societies where men usually held legal authority. Both were judged by their ability to manage households. Both faced the dangers of childbirth. Both carried enormous responsibility for raising the next generation. Both found their lives shaped by expectations they rarely had the power to rewrite. The castles may have looked magnificent from a distance, and the cottages may have appeared humble, but inside both lived women carrying burdens that modern fairy tales often choose to forget. Pregnancy, childbirth, motherhood, and the constant shadow of death. For a medieval woman, marriage usually marked the beginning of one expectation above all others: motherhood. The moment the wedding celebrations ended, family members, neighbors, and even religious leaders often expected that children would soon follow. Producing healthy sons and daughters was not simply considered a personal choice. It was viewed as one of the most important duties of a wife. In many households, a woman's position within her family became stronger after she gave birth, especially if she produced healthy children who survived infancy. But reaching that moment was anything but guaranteed. Pregnancy in the Middle Ages carried risks that are difficult for most people today to imagine. Modern hospitals, antibiotics, blood transfusions, ultrasound scans, and emergency surgery did not exist. Every pregnancy became a journey into uncertainty, where both mother and child faced dangers that no amount of hope or prayer could completely prevent. When a woman first realized she was pregnant, there was no medical test to confirm it. She relied on changes within her own body. Missed monthly cycles, nausea, exhaustion, changes in appetite, and advice from experienced women in the village often provided the first clues. Mothers, grandmothers, neighbors, and local midwives became the primary sources of knowledge. Most of what women understood about pregnancy came from generations of shared experience rather than scientific medicine. Some advice proved surprisingly practical. Pregnant women were often encouraged to avoid unnecessary physical danger, eat nourishing foods whenever possible, and rest when they could. Other beliefs reflected the medical theories of the age. People believed emotions could influence unborn children. Some thought frightening experiences might leave physical marks on babies. Others believed certain foods shaped a child's personality. These ideas remained part of medieval medical tradition for centuries. Yet everyday life rarely allowed much rest. A pregnant peasant woman usually continued working almost until childbirth. Fields still required planting. Animals still needed feeding. Bread still had to be baked. Water still had to be carried. Laundry still demanded endless hours of labor. Family survival depended upon her work. Only in the final stages of pregnancy might relatives encourage lighter duties. Even then, complete rest remained impossible for most families. Noblewomen experienced somewhat different pregnancies. They enjoyed better diets, cleaner living conditions, and assistance from servants. Their chambers offered greater comfort than village cottages. Physicians sometimes visited wealthy households. However, even the richest women possessed no guarantee of safety. Queens, duchesses, and noble ladies died during childbirth with heartbreaking regularity. Wealth reduced certain hardships. It did not eliminate the dangers. As pregnancy progressed, families quietly prepared for birth. Tiny garments were sewn, blankets were woven, cradles repaired. Religious prayers became more frequent. Everyone understood that joy and tragedy often stood side by side. The final weeks filled many women with equal measures of hope and fear. Childbirth itself usually took place inside the home. Unlike today, hospitals played almost no role. Instead, birth became an intensely female event. Female relatives gathered. Experienced neighbors arrived. Most importantly, the midwife took charge. The medieval midwife occupied a respected position within many communities. Although she lacked modern medical education, years of practical experience made her invaluable. She had witnessed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of births. She understood how labor normally progressed. She recognized many complications. She offered comfort, encouragement, and practical assistance throughout the ordeal. Men, including husbands, were usually absent from the birthing room. Their role remained outside while women worked together inside. The room itself was often warmed to provide comfort. Clean cloths were prepared, water heated, prayers whispered, candles burned beside religious images. Labor could last hours. Sometimes it continued for an entire day, sometimes even longer. No effective pain relief existed beyond herbal remedies, whose effectiveness varied greatly. Every contraction demanded extraordinary endurance. Every hour increased exhaustion. If labor progressed normally, relief slowly replaced fear. The baby's first cry filled the room with celebration. But if complications appeared, the atmosphere changed instantly. A baby positioned incorrectly, excessive bleeding, a labor that simply would not end. Any of these situations could become fatal. Without modern surgical techniques, doctors possessed few effective options. Many women who would easily survive childbirth today lost their lives during the Middle Ages. Infections presented another invisible enemy. Even successful deliveries sometimes ended tragically days later. Tiny bacteria, completely unknown to medieval medicine, entered wounds during childbirth. Fevers developed, weakness spread. Within days, a healthy new mother could suddenly become gravely ill. Families watched helplessly because they did not understand the true cause. When both mother and child survived, celebrations followed. Church baptism often occurred quickly because infant mortality remained so high. Parents feared that illness could strike without warning. Many babies were baptized within days, sometimes even hours after birth. The first months of life remained dangerous. Poor sanitation, malnutrition, disease, cold winters, summer epidemics, each threatened the fragile lives of newborn children. Many medieval parents buried infants before they ever learned to walk. The emotional pain was immense. Historical letters, prayers, and memorials reveal parents mourning children with profound grief. The stereotype that medieval parents cared less because death was common simply does not match the historical evidence. Loss became frequent precisely because love ran so deep. For mothers who survived, recovery remained brief. Within weeks, household responsibilities gradually returned. Another pregnancy often followed surprisingly soon. Large families were common, not only because people desired many children, but because so many failed to survive into adulthood. A woman might experience 6, 8, 10, or even more pregnancies throughout her lifetime. Each pregnancy carried fresh danger. Each birth repeated the same uncertainty. Motherhood extended far beyond giving birth. Women breastfed infants, often for many months or even years. They prepared food as children grew. They taught prayers. They instructed daughters in household skills. They introduced sons to family responsibilities until fathers assumed greater roles. Mothers became the first teachers every child encountered. They passed along practical knowledge that no written book contained: how to recognize spoiled grain, how to preserve vegetables through winter, which herbs soothed coughs, how to spin thread evenly, how to judge weather from the sky, how to stretch limited food supplies until harvest returned. This knowledge represented generations of accumulated experience. The bond between mother and child often became the emotional center of medieval family life. Children accompanied mothers almost everywhere. Young daughters learned by watching. Young sons remained close during early childhood. Entire households revolved around cooperation. Yet motherhood also brought constant anxiety. Every cough raised concern. Every fever inspired fear. A simple infection could become deadly within days. Mothers spent countless sleepless nights caring for sick children with little more than herbal remedies, prayers, and hope. Religion shaped motherhood deeply. The Virgin Mary stood as the ideal model of maternal love, sacrifice, humility, and faith. Women prayed to her during pregnancy, childbirth, and illness. Church ceremonies marked major stages of family life. After childbirth, many women participated in a religious ceremony often known as churching, giving thanks for surviving the dangers of delivery. Despite these moments of joy, the shadow of death never disappeared. A medieval woman understood that every pregnancy might be her last. She had seen neighbors die, perhaps sisters, perhaps cousins, perhaps even her own mother. Childbirth represented both the beginning of new life and one of the greatest dangers a woman would ever face. Looking back from the modern world, it is difficult to grasp the courage this demanded. These women entered labor without knowing whether they would ever hold their child or whether their child would ever know them. Yet they continued. They built families. They raised generations. They preserved communities through famine, plague, war, and hardship. Their names rarely appear in royal chronicles or famous histories, but every village, every town, every kingdom depended upon mothers willing to face extraordinary risks in order to bring the next generation into the world. For countless medieval women, motherhood became both the greatest source of love they would ever experience and the greatest danger they would ever endure. Religion, sin, obedience, and how the church shaped every woman's life. If there was one institution that influenced every medieval woman's life from birth until death, it was the church. Whether she was born into a royal palace, a merchant's home, or a small farming village, religion surrounded her every single day. Church bells marked the hours. Religious festivals shaped the calendar. Priests blessed marriages, baptized children, heard confessions, buried the dead, and offered guidance on nearly every aspect of life. To understand medieval women, it is impossible to separate their daily existence from religion. Faith was not simply something people practiced on Sundays. It was woven into every decision, every celebration, every fear, and every hope. From childhood, girls learned that God had created an ordered world. Every person had a place within that order. Kings ruled kingdoms. Priests guided souls. Fathers led households. Husbands governed families. Women were generally expected to support this structure through humility or obedience, patience, and devotion. These ideas appeared repeatedly in sermons, religious writings, and moral instruction. Young girls memorized prayers almost as soon as they learned to speak. They attended Mass with their families. They observed feast days honoring saints, They fasted during religious seasons. Even people who could not read became familiar with biblical stories through stained glass windows, church paintings, traveling preachers, and religious plays performed in town squares. One of the most important female figures in medieval Christianity was the Virgin Mary. To millions of believers, she represented purity, compassion, motherhood, and complete faith in God's will. Women prayed to her during pregnancy. They asked for her protection during childbirth. They sought comfort through her example during times of grief. Mary became the ideal against which many women measured themselves. Yet alongside this ideal stood another powerful biblical figure, Eve. According to Christian tradition, Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden introduced sin into the world. Many medieval theologians discuss this story when explaining human weakness and temptation. Some religious writers portrayed women as especially vulnerable to deception or temptation because of Eve's actions. Others emphasized that all humanity shared responsibility for sin. These differing interpretations created a complicated picture. Women could be honored as reflections of Mary, while simultaneously being warned not to imitate Eve. This contrast appeared throughout medieval religious thought. A good woman was expected to be modest. She dressed appropriately. She spoke respectfully. She remained faithful to her husband. She cared for her children. She attended church. She avoided gossip. She practiced charity toward the poor. These virtues were praised repeatedly by priests and religious teachers. Confession became another important part of spiritual life. People regularly confessed their sins to priests. Women discussed not only major offenses but also ordinary moral struggles, arguments, jealousy, dishonesty, anger, neglecting religious duties. Confession encouraged constant reflection upon personal behavior. Many medieval women sincerely desired to live according to these teachings. Religion offered hope in an uncertain world. Life expectancy remained short. Disease struck without warning. Harvests sometimes failed. War destroyed communities. Faith helped people endure suffering they could not control. Churches also served practical social functions. Neighbors gathered there weekly. Announcements were made, disputes settled. Festivals celebrated. Markets often developed nearby. The local church became the center of community life. Women participated actively in religious celebrations. They decorated churches, prepared feast day meals, organized charitable assistance, cared for the sick, supported religious processions. Although women could not ordinarily become priests in the medieval Western Church, they contributed significantly to religious communities. Convents offered one of the few alternatives to marriage. Not every woman became a wife. Some chose or were encouraged by their families to enter religious life. Inside convents, women became nuns dedicated to prayer, education, and service. Many convents developed into centers of learning. Nuns copied manuscripts by hand. They preserved ancient books. They taught girls. They studied theology, music, medicine, and languages. Some abbesses governed large religious communities with considerable authority. In certain cases, they managed extensive lands, supervised finances, and corresponded with kings and bishops. For educated women, convents sometimes provided opportunities unavailable elsewhere. One remarkable example is, she wrote books on theology, natural science, and medicine. She composed music. She advised powerful rulers. Her writings reveal an extraordinary intellect that earned respect across medieval Europe. Women like Hildegard were uncommon, but they demonstrate that medieval women's religious lives could extend far beyond quiet obedience. Another famous woman became known for her deeply influential spiritual writings. Living as a religious recluse attached to a church, she recorded visions emphasizing divine love and compassion during an era often marked by fear and suffering. Such women remind us that medieval spirituality was not simply imposed upon women. Many women actively shaped religious thought themselves. Still, ordinary village life looked very different. Most women never entered convents, and instead they balanced endless household responsibilities with religious obligations. Missing Mass without good reason attracted criticism. Failing to observe important holy days damaged one's reputation. Parents taught children prayers before meals, before sleep, and during difficult moments. Faith accompanied nearly every stage of life. Illness inspired prayer. Storms inspired prayer. Childbirth inspired prayer. Harvest inspired prayer. Death inspired prayer. Religion provided explanations for events people could not understand scientifically. Disease might be viewed as a trial, natural disasters as divine warnings, unexpected survival as God's mercy. This worldview shaped emotional life as much as practical behavior. The church also influenced ideas about marriage. Marriage was considered sacred. Husbands and wives promised lifelong commitment before God. Adultery became not only a personal betrayal, but also a serious spiritual offense. Divorce in the modern sense remained extremely limited. Couples were generally expected to remain together despite hardship. Religious courts occasionally heard disputes involving marriage, inheritance, or family obligations. Women sometimes appealed to church authorities in cases involving abandonment or certain forms of mistreatment. Although outcomes varied greatly, the church occasionally offered protections unavailable through secular authorities. However, religious expectations also reinforced existing social hierarchies. Many sermons encouraged wives to respect their husband's authority. Patience during hardship became a celebrated virtue. Self-sacrifice received praise. These teachings reflected broader medieval ideas about family and society. It would be inaccurate to imagine every woman accepted these expectations without question. Historical records preserve moments of disagreement. Some women challenged local priests. Others defended their property in church courts. Some rejected arranged marriages. Others sought religious vocations despite family opposition. Human personalities remained as diverse then as they are today. The church itself was never completely unified. Different priests emphasized different teachings. Local customs blended with religious traditions, practices varied across kingdoms and centuries. Religion in medieval Europe was remarkably diverse despite its shared foundations. Perhaps the greatest comfort religion offered medieval women was hope. Hope that children who died young rested safely with God. Hope that suffering possessed meaning. Hope that faithful lives would be rewarded beyond death. Hope that justice ultimately existed, even when earthly life seemed unfair, for women who buried infants, survived famine, endured dangerous childbirth, or watched wars destroy their homes. Such hope became an essential source of strength. The Church shaped how medieval women understood themselves, their families, their responsibilities, and their place in the world. It encouraged obedience, humility, charity, and faith. It sometimes limited opportunities. It sometimes created unexpected ones. It comforted the grieving. It educated the fortunate. It preserved knowledge. It reinforced authority. It inspired extraordinary acts of compassion. Like medieval society itself, religion was neither entirely oppressive nor entirely liberating. It was a powerful force that touched every part of a woman's life, from the first prayer whispered over her cradle to the final blessing spoken over her grave. Endless labor, housework, farming, trade, and the work that never ended. For many people today, the word work usually means a job with a beginning and an end. There is a time to start, a time to finish, and eventually an opportunity to rest. For the average medieval woman, there was almost no such distinction. Her work did not begin when the sun rose, nor did it truly end when darkness fell. Every hour of the day demanded another task, another responsibility, another problem that needed solving before tomorrow arrived. In many ways, medieval society rested upon the invisible labor of women. Kings issued laws, knights fought battles, merchants traveled across Europe, priests led religious ceremonies, but none of these activities could continue if households collapsed. And households survived because women kept them functioning. Before dawn, while much of the village still slept, many women were already awake. The first task was usually the fire. If the hearth had gone cold overnight, it needed to be lit again. Without fire, there would be no warm food, no bread, no heat, and no way to boil water. Lighting a fire sounds simple today. In the Middle Ages, it could take considerable time and patience. Once the flames were burning, breakfast had to be prepared. The meal was often simple: bread, porridge, cheese, ale or weak beer, perhaps leftover vegetables from the previous evening. Food rarely appeared quickly. Every loaf represented hours of previous work. Grain had been planted months earlier, harvested by hand, carried home, ground into flour, mixed into dough, then baked in ovens that required careful attention. A single piece of bread represented an entire chain of labor. Water came next. Most homes possessed no indoor plumbing. Women and older daughters carried heavy buckets from wells, rivers, or village springs. This journey repeated itself several times every day. Clean water remained essential for cooking, washing, brewing, and caring for livestock. The physical effort was enormous. Buckets filled with water were surprisingly heavy, and many women carried them over uneven roads in every season. After breakfast, The household divided into countless responsibilities. Animals demanded immediate attention. Chickens needed feeding, eggs collected, cows milked, goats tended, pigs checked. If even one animal became sick, a family's financial security could suffer dramatically. Livestock represented wealth. Losing a cow might mean losing milk, cheese, butter, and future income, all at once. Children required supervision throughout the day. Young infants stayed close to their mothers while older children gradually joined household work. Education often happened while working. A daughter learned spinning by watching her mother. A son learned farming by following his father into the fields. Knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. The spinning wheel, or in earlier centuries the spindle, became one of the most familiar tools in a woman's hands. Clothing did not arrive from distant factories. Families produced much of it themselves. Raw wool first required cleaning, then carding, then spinning into thread, finally weaving into cloth before sewing could even begin. Creating a single garment demanded weeks of patient effort. Every tear required repair. Nothing useful was wasted. Laundry became another exhausting responsibility. There were no washing machines, no detergents, no running water. Clothing was soaked, scrubbed, rinsed repeatedly, wrung by hand, and hung outside whenever weather allowed. Heavy blankets demanded even greater effort. Winter washing became particularly miserable. Hands remained cold for hours. Yet clean clothing reduced disease and improved comfort. Household cleanliness mattered more than many modern people realize. Although medieval sanitation certainly had limitations, women understood the importance of removing spoiled food, sweeping floors, cleaning cooking tools, and maintaining living spaces as carefully as possible. They may not have understood bacteria, but they recognized that filth often accompanied illness. During planting and harvest seasons, housework did not replace agricultural labor. It simply added to it. Women joined husbands, brothers, fathers, and neighbors in the fields. They planted seeds, pulled weeds, gathered vegetables, harvested grain, bound sheaves, loaded carts, collected fruit. Every successful harvest depended upon cooperation. Entire villages worked together because delaying even a few days could allow crops to spoil. After returning from the fields, the work continued. Vegetables required preservation. Meat needed salting or smoking. Fruit had to be dried. Grain stored carefully away from moisture and rodents. Preparing for winter became a constant concern. A family that failed to preserve enough food during summer risked hunger when snow covered the fields. Brewing ale formed another important responsibility in many households. Modern people often imagine ale as simply an alcoholic drink. In medieval Europe, it frequently served as a safer alternative to contaminated water. Women who brewed well gained respect throughout their communities. Some eventually sold surplus ale for additional family income. In fact, brewing remained closely associated with women in many regions before it gradually became dominated by professional male brewers. Markets offered another opportunity for women's work. Not every woman attended regularly, but many sold butter, eggs, vegetables, cheese, cloth, candles, herbs, or handmade goods. These small sales provided essential income. Market days also became social occasions where women exchanged news, advice, recipes, and practical knowledge. In growing towns, opportunities expanded. Merchant wives often managed shops while husbands traveled. Craftsmen's wives helped produce goods. Textile workshops depended heavily upon female labor. Women worked as spinners, weavers, seamstresses, bakers, brewers, laundresses, servants, and vendors. Some widows inherited businesses after their husbands died and successfully operated them for years. Their names rarely appear in famous history books, yet they played important roles in local economies. Noblewomen experienced different responsibilities, but rarely enjoyed idle lives. Managing a castle demanded constant attention. Servants required supervision. Supplies had to be counted. Guests welcomed. Medical care arranged, accounts recorded, food inventories checked. Large estates consumed enormous quantities of grain, meat, firewood, cloth, candles, and wine. Without careful organization, shortages quickly developed. A capable noblewoman acted almost like the chief executive of a vast household. She coordinated dozens of workers while ensuring the comfort and security of everyone under her care. War often increased these burdens. If husbands departed for military campaigns, women assumed even greater responsibility. They collected rents, negotiated with neighboring landowners, resolved disputes among tenants, organized food distribution. In some cases, they even directed castle defenses during sieges. Whether noble or peasant, women rarely experienced complete leisure. Religious festivals provided occasional breaks from routine. Weddings offered celebration. Village fairs brought music and dancing. Christmas, Easter, and saints' feast days allowed moments of joy, yet even festivals demanded preparation. Food needed cooking, clothing repaired, guests accommodated. Work simply changed its form. As evening approached, another round of responsibilities began. Animals were secured for the night. The evening meal prepared. Children washed and settled. Clothing repaired beside the fire. Wool spun during fading daylight. Tools inspected for tomorrow. Prayers offered before sleep. Finally, after hours of continuous effort, women rested. But even sleep offered no guarantee of peace. A crying infant, a sick animal, a storm threatening the roof, a child with fever. Any emergency could send the household back into motion. Looking through modern eyes, this endless cycle appears exhausting. It truly was. The physical demands alone required extraordinary endurance. Many women lived with aching backs, rough hands, worn joints, and constant fatigue. Yet they continued because families depended entirely upon their labor. History often remembers kings who won battles and explorers who crossed oceans. Far less attention goes to the millions of women who quietly ensured that villages survived one season after another. Without their work, there would have been no bread to eat, no cloth to wear, no children raised, no homes maintained, no harvest stored for winter. The medieval economy was not sustained solely by soldiers, merchants, or nobles. It was sustained every single day by women whose labor rarely received recognition, but whose efforts touched every aspect of life. Their work had no weekends, no retirement, no vacations, only another sunrise and another day waiting to begin. Love, sex, punishment, scandal, and the rules. Every medieval woman was expected to follow. Behind the stone walls of castles and the wooden doors of village cottages, medieval women lived under a system of expectations that reached far beyond work and family. Their behavior, reputation, relationships, and sexuality were all closely watched, not only by husbands and parents, but by neighbors, priests, local officials, and the wider community. In the medieval world, a woman's reputation could become one of her most valuable possessions. Unlike money or land, reputation could not easily be replaced once it was damaged. A single rumor might affect marriage prospects. A public argument could become village gossip. An accusation, even one impossible to prove, could follow a woman for years. In small communities where everyone knew one another, privacy hardly existed. People noticed who visited whose house, who walked together after sunset, who missed church, who argued in the marketplace, who seemed unusually friendly with someone outside marriage. News spread quickly, often changing a little with every person who repeated it. For young unmarried women, preserving a respectable reputation became especially important. Families expected daughters to avoid situations that might create suspicion. Many fathers limited opportunities for daughters to spend time alone with young men. Meetings usually occurred during festivals, church gatherings, markets, or while working alongside other villagers. Even then, conversations often happened within sight of relatives or neighbors. This supervision reflected both social expectations and practical concerns. Marriage influenced a family's future. Protecting a daughter's reputation protected the family's standing within the community. Romantic love certainly existed. Despite popular assumptions, medieval people fell in love, wrote poetry, exchanged gifts, composed songs, and experienced heartbreak, much like people today. Courtly literature celebrated admiration, loyalty, longing, and devotion. Troubadours sang of impossible love. Poets described beauty with remarkable emotion. Private letters between husbands and wives reveal genuine affection, tenderness, and deep emotional bonds. Yet everyday reality remained more complicated than romantic stories. Marriage usually carried economic responsibilities. A household required cooperation. Children needed raising. Fields demanded labor. Businesses required management. Love could strengthen a marriage, but survival often depended more upon partnership than passion. Sex within marriage was generally understood as a natural part of family life. Religious teachings encouraged husbands and wives to remain faithful to one another. Marriage created a legitimate place for intimacy while helping establish stable households and raise children. However, discussions of sexuality remained surrounded by moral expectations. Church leaders frequently reminded believers to avoid lust, adultery, and relationships outside marriage. adultery carried serious consequences. For women, the risks often proved greater than for men. A married woman's affair created uncertainty about inheritance and family lineage. Questions regarding the identity of children's fathers threatened property rights and noble succession. As a result, many societies judged female adultery particularly harshly. Punishments varied widely depending on region, local law, and social status. Some women faced public humiliation. Others paid fines. In severe cases, harsher legal penalties could follow. Men also faced punishment for adultery in many places, though enforcement was often uneven. Local customs frequently influenced how justice was applied. Scandal became a powerful social force. Communities often punish behavior through public shame as much as formal law. A woman accused of improper conduct might lose friendships, marriage opportunities, or community support even if no court became involved. Public opinion mattered enormously. Words carried weight. Rumors could shape lives. Widows occupied a unique position within medieval society. Unlike unmarried daughters or married wives, widows often gained greater legal independence. Many inherited businesses. Some managed farms. Others controlled property until children reached adulthood. This new independence occasionally attracted criticism. An economically successful widow challenged expectations that women should remain dependent upon male authority. As a result, some widows encountered suspicion simply because they possessed unusual freedom. Women's appearance also attracted constant attention. Clothing reflected not only wealth but morality. Excessively luxurious dress could invite accusations of vanity. Clothing considered too revealing attracted criticism. Hair coverings became common among married women in many regions as symbols of modesty and respectability. Jewelry, cosmetics, and fashionable garments remained subjects of debate. Some religious writers warned that excessive concern for beauty encouraged pride. Others accepted fine clothing when appropriate to social rank. These discussions reveal ongoing tension between personal appearance and moral expectations. Domestic conflict naturally existed. No society has ever been free from disagreements between husbands and wives. Historical court records preserve arguments over money, property, inheritance, broken promises, and household responsibilities. Some marriages remained affectionate partnerships throughout life. Others became deeply unhappy. The legal rights available to women varied significantly across medieval Europe. Some local courts heard women's complaints regarding property or abandonment. Certain communities offered greater protections than others. At the same time, many legal traditions recognized a husband's authority within marriage, leaving women with limited options if relationships became abusive. Reality differed from one region to another, and historians continue to debate how consistently laws were enforced in everyday life. Another persistent feature of medieval society was gossip. Modern people often dismiss gossip as harmless conversation. In medieval villages, it could influence reputations, business opportunities, and family alliances. Women were sometimes stereotyped as habitual gossips in medieval literature, but surviving records show that men also spread rumors, participated in disputes, and shaped public opinion. Gossip was a community activity rather than an exclusively female one. The Middle Ages also witnessed periodic concern about prostitution. Growing towns created opportunities for commercial sex, and authorities responded in different ways. Some cities attempted to regulate brothels, others tried to suppress them. Attitudes varied widely depending on local government and religious influence. Women involved in prostitution often occupied vulnerable positions within society, facing poverty, limited alternatives, and significant social stigma. One of the most misunderstood aspects of medieval history involves the idea that every woman lived in constant fear of punishment. The reality was more complex. Most women spent their lives raising families, working, attending church, helping neighbors, and participating in ordinary community life. Formal punishments existed, but everyday life centered far more on cooperation than constant conflict. Communities depended upon mutual assistance. Neighbors borrowed tools, shared harvest labor, helped during childbirth, cared for sick relatives, rebuilt homes after fires. Social harmony mattered because survival depended upon it. Even so, expectations remained strict. A respectable medieval woman was generally expected to be faithful, hardworking, modest, religious, charitable, and obedient to accepted social norms. Failing to meet those expectations could bring criticism ranging from whispered gossip to formal legal action depending upon the situation. Yet medieval women were never simply passive figures following rules without thought. Many negotiated with husbands, managed businesses, defended property rights, raised intelligent children, supported neighbors during hardship, preserved family traditions, influenced local communities in quiet but meaningful ways. Their strength often appeared not through public speeches or political office, but through persistence, wisdom, and resilience. Love existed beside duty. Joy existed beside hardship. Laughter existed beside fear. The same woman who worried about gossip could also sing during harvest. The same wife expected to obey social customs might successfully manage an estate while her husband fought in distant wars. Human lives rarely fit neatly to simple categories. The harsh reality was not that medieval women were denied every happiness. It was that nearly every happiness exists within boundaries, defined by society, religion, family expectations, and community judgment. Every decision carried consequences. Every reputation required protection. Every relationship demanded careful balance. For countless women, navigating those expectations became one of the greatest challenges of everyday life. Widows, witches, outsiders, and the women who live beyond society's expectations. Not every medieval woman followed the path society expected. The ideal life was clear. A girl would grow into a respectable young woman, marry, raise children, support her husband, live according to the teachings of the church, and eventually grow old, surrounded by family. But real life was rarely so predictable. War claimed husbands, Disease emptied entire households. Accidents destroyed families overnight. Some women never married. Others could not have children. Some chose religious life. Others found themselves living on the edges of society, where survival became far more difficult than anyone had imagined. Among these women, widows occupied one of the most unusual positions in medieval society. The death of a husband brought overwhelming grief, but it also changed a woman's legal and economic status almost immediately. For the first time since childhood, many widows gained a degree of independence that had been impossible while living under the authority of either a father or a husband. If local law allowed it, a widow might inherit part of the family's property. She could continue operating a workshop, manage farmland, collect rents, negotiate business agreements, hire workers, represent the household in legal matters. In towns across medieval Europe, widows often kept family businesses alive after their husbands died. A blacksmith's widow might continue supervising the forge with hired craftsmen. A brewer's widow could keep selling ale. A merchant's widow sometimes completed trading agreements that her husband had begun. Without these women, many family businesses would have disappeared entirely. Yet independence came with enormous challenges. A widow also lost the person who had shared the family's workload. Fields still needed planting. Taxes still had to be paid. Children still required food. Livestock still demanded care. There was no time to grieve for long. Survival required immediate action. For poorer widows, life could become desperate. Without land, savings, or relatives willing to help, many struggled simply to obtain enough food. Some found work as servants. Others remarried. A few entered religious communities. Many relied upon the charity of neighbors or the church during difficult years. Old age made these struggles even harder. An elderly widow, unable to perform physical labor, often depended entirely upon the kindness of family members or local communities. When support disappeared, poverty became almost unavoidable. Society generally respected widows who lived modest, hard-working lives. However, women living alone sometimes attracted suspicion. A woman without a husband challenged traditional expectations. She made her own decisions, managed her own affairs, owned property in some cases. This independence could create admiration, but it could also create resentment. Another group of women lived outside ordinary family structures altogether. Some never married. A few inherited enough wealth to remain independent. Others devoted themselves to religious service without formally entering convents. Some worked as healers, herbalists, or caregivers within their communities. These women often possessed valuable practical knowledge. For generations, mothers and grandmothers had passed down experience about herbs, wounds, childbirth, fevers, and common illnesses. Without trained physicians nearby, villages frequently depended upon these experienced women. They understood which plants soothed pain, which herbs eased coughing, how to clean wounds, how to comfort women during childbirth. Most of this knowledge came through observation and experience rather than written medical texts. Many communities appreciated these healers. People sought their advice during illness. Parents trusted them with sick children. Neighbors thanked them after difficult births. Their work saved lives despite the limitations of medieval medicine. However, knowledge could sometimes inspire fear as easily as respect. When illness spread unexpectedly, when crops failed repeatedly, or when unexplained tragedies struck a village, frightened people searched for explanations. Long before scientific understanding developed, communities often interpreted disasters through religious or supernatural beliefs. It is here that one of history's greatest misconceptions appears. Many people imagine that throughout the Middle Ages, thousands of women were constantly being burned as witches. The historical reality is far more complicated. Most of the large-scale witch trials associated with Europe actually occurred much later, primarily during the late 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, after the medieval period had largely ended. This does not mean accusations of harmful magic were completely absent during the Middle Ages. Belief in magic, curses, charms, and supernatural forces certainly existed. Church authorities sometimes condemned practices they believed involved forbidden magic. Local communities occasionally accused individuals of causing harm through supernatural means. But the widespread organized witch hunts, familiar from popular culture, belonged mostly to the early modern period rather than the medieval era itself. Even so, women who lived outside ordinary social expectations sometimes became vulnerable to suspicion. An elderly widow living alone, a healer with unusual herbal knowledge, a woman involved in a long-standing dispute with neighbors, someone considered strange, outspoken, or isolated. Under stressful circumstances, such individuals could become targets of rumor. Rumors often proved more dangerous than facts. Once suspicion entered a close-knit community, it could spread rapidly. The same neighbors who once accepted a woman might begin interpreting ordinary events differently. A failed harvest, a sick cow, a child's sudden fever. Without scientific explanations, fear sometimes filled the gaps. Fortunately, many medieval communities responded far more practically. Most people continued seeking help from experienced healers. Midwives remained respected. Herbal remedies remained widely used. Daily life depended far more upon cooperation than accusation. Women also appeared among medieval pilgrims. Some traveled hundreds of miles to famous religious shrines seeking healing, forgiveness, or spiritual renewal. Pilgrimages offered rare opportunities to leave familiar surroundings. Along dangerous roads, women encountered merchants, monks, nobles, beggars, and travelers from distant lands. These journeys expanded horizons that everyday village life rarely allowed. Another group living beyond ordinary expectations consisted of women attached to royal courts. Ladies-in-waiting served queens and noblewomen. They received education in manners, music, languages, and diplomacy. Court life appeared glamorous from a distance, but involved strict etiquette, political intrigue, and constant competition for favor. One careless comment could damage an entire family's reputation. Every smile, conversation, and friendship carried political consequences. Women who successfully navigated court life required intelligence, patience, and remarkable social awareness. History also remembers a handful of extraordinary women who stepped beyond nearly every expectation of their age. Some governed kingdoms during the absence of kings. Others commanded respect as scholars, writers, or religious leaders. A few defended castles during sieges. Many more left quieter legacies within their own communities. Yet these exceptional stories should not overshadow the lives of ordinary women. Most medieval women never became famous. Their names disappeared from written history. They survived wars, buried children, managed households, worked fields, supported neighbors, endured hardships that rarely attracted chroniclers' attention. They shaped history not through dramatic public achievements, but through the countless ordinary actions that allowed medieval society to continue from one generation to the next. The widow rebuilding her household after tragedy. The healer comforting frightened mothers. The elderly woman preserving family traditions. The merchant's widow protecting her children's inheritance. These women rarely wore crowns, yet their courage proved just as real. The harsh reality of medieval life was not simply that women faced hardship. It was that unexpected misfortune could transform an ordinary wife into someone living outside society's expectations almost overnight. A single epidemic, one battlefield death, one failed harvest, one accident. Everything could change. Those who adapted survived. Those who found support rebuilt their lives. Those who stood alone often faced the greatest struggles of all. Their stories remind us that medieval women were never a single uniform group. Some lived comfortably. Others struggled constantly. Some gained independence through tragedy. Others remained bound by circumstance until the end of their lives. Together they reveal a world far more diverse, resilient, and deeply human than the simple stereotypes of history often suggest. Queens, noblewomen, and the powerful women who defied medieval expectations. For most medieval women, power was something exercised by others. Fathers made decisions, husbands controlled households, lords governed estates, kings ruled kingdoms. Yet history also remembers a remarkable group of women who proved that ability and determination could sometimes overcome the limitations imposed by medieval society. These women did not represent the ordinary experience. They were exceptions, but exceptions powerful enough to influence wars, shape kingdoms, direct diplomacy, and leave legacies that lasted for centuries. Their stories remind us that medieval women were never simply passive observers of history. They could become its architects. The life of a medieval queen appeared glamorous from a distance. Magnificent clothing, great castles, lavish banquets, royal ceremonies, precious jewelry, foreign ambassadors. Everything suggested unlimited privilege. The reality was far more demanding. A queen's first responsibility was often to produce legitimate heirs. Without children, especially sons, political stability could quickly disappear. Entire dynasties depended upon successful royal marriages. Every pregnancy carried enormous political importance alongside personal danger. If a queen failed to bear children, rumors spread quickly. Advisors questioned the future of the kingdom. Foreign rulers watched closely. The pressure was immense. Beyond motherhood, queens performed countless political duties. They welcomed ambassadors, organized royal households, supervised servants, distributed charity, patronized churches and monasteries, arranged marriages among noble families, accompanied kings during important ceremonies. Their influence often worked quietly rather than publicly. A wise queen could shape decisions through private conversations long before official announcements reached the kingdom. When kings traveled or fought in distant wars, queens sometimes governed as regents. During these periods, they approved financial decisions, oversaw government officials, resolved disputes, managed royal estates, issued instructions in the king's name. Such responsibilities demanded intelligence, confidence, and political skill. One of the greatest examples is she became one of the most influential women of the Middle Ages. As queen, duchess, landowner, diplomat, and mother of kings, Eleanor demonstrated extraordinary political ability. She traveled extensively across Europe, participated in major political events, and continued influencing royal affairs well into old age. Her life reminds us that some medieval women exercised remarkable authority despite living in a male-dominated world. Another extraordinary ruler was. After the death of her father, she fought to claim the English throne, leading to years of civil war known as the Anarchy. Although she never secured the crown permanently, her determination ultimately helped establish her son's royal dynasty. Her story illustrates how fiercely medieval women could defend what they believed was rightfully theirs. Powerful women also appeared beyond England, served as regent for her young son, and successfully governed France during one of its most vulnerable periods. She balanced noble rivalries, managed finances, and preserved royal authority despite constant political pressure. Such women earned respect not because society expected female leadership, but because circumstances demanded exceptional ability. Not every influential noblewoman ruled kingdoms. Many governed great estates. A noble estate functioned almost like a small town. Hundreds of people depended upon its success. Fields required management, taxes collected, buildings repaired, food distributed, servants supervised, accounts recorded. When husbands traveled or fought in military campaigns, wives frequently assumed responsibility for these enormous operations. Some noblewomen became experts in administration. They negotiated contracts, settled legal disputes, supervised construction projects, purchased supplies, protected family interests through careful financial planning. Written records reveal women signing official documents, corresponding with bishops and nobles, and making complex economic decisions. Education contributed greatly to these abilities. Many aristocratic girls learned reading, writing, arithmetic, languages, music, and household administration. Books remained rare and expensive, making literacy a valuable skill. Educated noblewomen often maintained family libraries and encouraged learning among their children. Some even sponsored the copying of manuscripts, preserving important religious and historical works. Patronage became another source of influence. Wealthy women funded churches, supported monasteries, commissioned artwork, helped establish hospitals, provided food for the poor during difficult seasons. Their generosity strengthened both religious institutions and local communities. Military emergencies occasionally transformed noblewomen into defenders. If enemies attacked while husbands remained away, women sometimes organized castle defenses. Historical chronicles describe noblewomen directing soldiers, rationing supplies, encouraging defenders, and refusing surrender until reinforcements arrived. Although they rarely fought with swords on the battlefield, their leadership often determined whether castles survived. Life at court demanded constant political awareness. Royal courts were filled with alliances, rivalries, rumors, and competition for influence. Every conversation carried meaning. Every friendship could become politically valuable or dangerously costly. A careless remark might offend an important noble family. An overlooked guest might become a future enemy. Women who successfully navigated court politics possessed remarkable emotional intelligence. Marriage among the nobility remained primarily political. A daughter might be married to strengthen alliances between kingdoms. Dowries included castles, land, money, and legal rights. The personal happiness of the couple sometimes mattered less than the political advantages created by their union. Even so, many noble marriages developed genuine affection over time. Private letters exchanged between husbands and wives reveal warmth, trust, humor, and deep mutual respect. These relationships remind us that political marriages did not necessarily exclude love. Powerful women also influenced culture. They encouraged poets, supported musicians, collected books, preserved family histories, promoted education for children. Their patronage helped shape the intellectual life of medieval Europe. Still, every privilege came with limitations. A queen remained expected to uphold religious values. A noblewoman's reputation remained under constant observation. Producing heirs remained essential. Political mistakes attracted harsh criticism. Male nobles often questioned female authority. Even successful rulers had to prove themselves repeatedly in ways many men never faced. Some women succeeded brilliantly. Others struggled against opposition that never truly disappeared. Yet their achievements changed history. They negotiated peace instead of war, protected kingdoms during succession crises, saved castles from conquest, raised future kings, preserved dynasties, supported learning and religion. Without them, medieval Europe would have developed very differently. It is important, however, not to mistake these exceptional lives for the ordinary experience of medieval women. While queens discussed diplomacy with ambassadors, peasant women harvested grain.